and I appreciate the World Economic Forum.
A video circulates on the internet featuring Damani hurling abuses at Klaus Schwab during the 2024 Davos meeting. The video features visuals of Schwab from the 54th annual meeting of the World Economic Forum at Davos, held on January 16, 2024. The clip shows the speaker shouting profanities and then shows Schwab exiting the stage.
And I appreciate the World Economic Forum providing me the opportunity to be on this stage and say, you Klaus Schwab and your world order. We the people were born free, we will stay free, and you and all of your globalist friends, including everyone in this room, can go yourself.
Well, hello there. Thank you for joining me today. I would like to make an announcement that in case, likely this show is going to be in segments. And what I will do is I'll put the numbers in front of it. I don't know if it's going to be 2 segments or 3 segments, but I'll make sure they upload all at the same time. Got a lot of information here, and I wanted to keep it all together. What is going on? I was just looking at something innocently, and I have 3 or 4 files that I need to get to share with you, which I consider pretty important. And this one is very important. This one is about bunga bunga parties, sex with children, land theft, World Wildlife Group, WWF, and UNESCO. Stealing, robbing, and raping is the theme. So I've been talking in the past about these people and their cocaine usage. As a matter of fact, there is a secret cocaine plant here in the United States in New Jersey. Pure cocaine can be had there. Switzerland is trying to get rid of laws against cocaine. I have said for a very long time, in the late 70s, me, your sweet, innocent podcast person, Diane, actually did cocaine. It was all over the place in California. Everybody was doing cocaine on the party scene. So, and I've said in the past that the reason I didn't find it that interesting after a while was because of this delusional thinking that people get into when they're taking cocaine. It just seemed kind of boring to me. And like I've said in the past, some of these things these people cook up remind me very much of somebody high on cocaine. Remember, they're psychopaths. They deal in high risk, high reward kind of behavior. And anything that can have a fluctuation like land, oil, property has their attention, and their interest is in stealing it. So for a week, each January, billionaires, celebrities, politicians, and royalty converge on a ski resort in Switzerland to ponder society's problems at an event dubbed the Super Bowl of Capitalism. The annual meeting of the World Economic Forum, dubbed Davos, it just goes by Davos, for the town that hosts it. See some 3,000 attendees pour into hundreds of presentations and panels. World leaders, rich listeners, and heads of Fortune 500 companies flock to sessions on everything from climate change to global trade and artificial intelligence. And this year's theme is rebuilding trust. I found that one pretty interesting, right? Rebuilding trust. Psychopaths only know how to destroy trust. So as they go on talking about this rebuilding trust, just poke into some of the conferences for yourself. They're very arrogant when they're talking about nothing conciliatory about them when they're talking about rebuilding trust. So then another headline said, Davos debauchery underbelly, how the global elite indulge in cocaine, caviar, and champagne at secret bunga parties. That's Bunga. This show is going to be, at the end of the show, I will be talking about what these people are doing as far as it is more evil than anybody could ever imagine what they're doing with children. And I will be addressing that at the end. But the first part of the show, there's 2 groups of characters here. We got the world, Wildlife Federation, and we've got the UNESCO. Both of them are founded by the same people. Both of them are in Africa. This is another form of colonization, is what it is. So let me keep reading. On Bunga Bunga, the phrase is legendary and refers to apparent sex parties, which the former prime minister, it was Bengliosi, the prime minister of Italy, okay? He got caught. Basically, what happened was he was having these wild parties, okay? So, what they said, Bergliosi said, no, somebody else wrote a book, and the phrase originally came from Colonel Gaddafi, who told him a joke. Berlusconi is quoted as saying, a pair of Italian politicians are captured by a fierce African tribe and tied to poles. A tribal leader says to one of the Italians, do you want to die or bunga bunga? The politician chooses a second option, but bunga bunga turns out to mean forced intercourse. All the warriors in the village did him, said Berlusconi in the book. The tribal leader that approaches the second Italian and asks the same question. The terrified Italian says, I'd prefer to die. The tribesman replied, fine, you will die, but first let's do some bunga bunga. For years, bunga bunga scandal appeared to be behind Berlusconi, but last year this is from a few years ago, it reared its ugly head again. There was a mysterious death of a Moroccan party guest. The 34-year-old model had been a star witness at Berlusconi's trial, claiming she witnessed strip teases at his orgies and that he personally gave her 2,000 euros in cash one night. She was planning a tell-all book revealing how satanic rituals were performed at the bashes. She was also due to take the stand at another trial in which Berlusconi is currently embroiled. This is here again from a few years ago, where he is accused of paying a witness to give false testimony about his parties. So what happened was, and this Berlusconi thing, interestingly enough, happened around the same time that Epstein was happening. And I'd like to make a point here. In the past, I don't know, in the last couple of shows, when I was reading from their own literature as far as their game plan, they said that they typically run 2 operations, okay? 2. Well, of course, they have the money to run 2 operations, and it makes a certain amount of sense to run 2 operations, right? In case one of them gets caught, they got the second operation to fall back on. So I think that Epstein happened around the same time. Here's why I think they're having these so-called arrests and Berlusconi getting in trouble and all this kind of stuff, along with Epstein. It is to set up a ring for the circus, okay? Look over here. Look, the elephants are dancing over in that ring. Oh, wait a minute. Look over here. We got some monkeys over there. Oh, wait a minute. Look over here. So what they've developed is like a 3-ring circus, right? So while everybody for years has been talking about Epstein, well, I don't even really believe Epstein is a true character, okay? But that's aside. So while they were running all these so-called children getting raped things, and people like Virginia Roberts, she is a transgender. I doubt she was getting raped, or at least raped in the way that we would think of it, right? So these 2 operations were going along around the same time. We have Berlusconi, and then over there, Epstein first got caught in 2005. Berlusconi's defense described the dinner parties dating from 2010 as elegant soirees. Prosecutors said they were sex-fueled gatherings that women were paid to attend. Okay, so what happened was this term bunga bunga originally happened from Australia. Originally simply a light-hearted term for dating that originated in Australia in the 1800s. It's believed that bunga bunga was first taught to Berlusconi by none other than Muammar al-Gaddafi. The term was then adopted by the Italian media somewhat as a joke and frequently quoted in both Italian and international press in the run-up to the 2001 child exploitation investigation into Berlusconi. And with his Berlusconi thing, I read tons and tons and tons about this thing, right? Well, there seems to be this theme that, well, Berlusconi was rich and famous, but those girls, they were old enough. They were about 17 years old. So if you were to try to tell somebody about the Berlusconi issue and this bunga bunga business, you'd get discounted. They'd say, yeah, I already heard about all that. Those girls were pretty old, so this really doesn't get into like child rape, right? This is how they want to position these things, right? They position it like Berlusconi's having all this sex. Well, does he even have a penis? So, um, anyway, so the run up to the 2011 child exploitation investigation. So, and these investigations are all about omission. There was also a song about Bongo Bongo. I don't want to leave the Congo. Berlusconi is also known for telling an old, vulgar joke about two colonial officers who were captured by a Sodominic, meaning Sodominic, African tribe chief who forces them to submit to Bunga Bunga. In his updated version, political humor at its finest, the colonial officers are replaced by two opposition ministers. So, and then they said this bunga bunga, they keep bringing it back to Gaddafi. It's a right of his African harem. What's a bunga bunga party? It's a party where obviously I had to really look around a lot because they were all focused on this one girl who was, I think, about 17. I'm not saying that girl should have gotten raped or anything. I'm just saying that the focus in all the articles I read tended to lean toward these 17-year-old girls. But then yet when I started digging into the paperwork, they started talking about underage, right? Children they started talking about. Because what happened was one of the girls got caught, and I don't know, it's too much to go into. It doesn't matter. So, why did Gaddafi tell Berlusconi about Bunga Bunga is the big question here, right? So, there was they call it the bloody divorce of his second wife, actress Veronica Lario, was brief and forceful. The path of my marriage is marked. I cannot continue with a man who frequents minors. They participated in the orgiastic parties that Berlusconi organized in some of the mansions together with influential friends whom he popularly called Bunga Bunga. So, Bunga Bunga, right? My question is, who's going to stop these people? Who's going to stop them from war and raping children? The rich, the powerful, and the filthy secrets I'll be covering today. High-risk behavior, psychopathic traits, drugs, gambling, rape, no conscience. Keep people busy with Epstein. Dual roles, like that Pizzagate. Was Pizzagate a dual role? How often have they turned on the elites? That was another part here. Today, I'm going to be talking about panda bears and what this symbolism means for children. And there's also there's UNESCO and the other group, both run by the same people who are into this specific kind of child rape having to do with pandas. Well, I had several files open. The other day, I was just casually looking around because, Claire Daly, that roguish Irish person, along with Conor McGregor, have been speaking out, and people are saying, those Irish, they really do love us. Well, half of my family is Irish, so I'm not bashing the Irish here. But I went looking because I was pretty sure that Claire Daly, that's CLAREDALY, was likely transgender, so I just went to look. Well, well, well. She's one of the trannies that wears a really wild looking wig, right? So then you don't think it's a wig. So, yes, what do I see when I look up her picture? First thing I see, she has tattooed to her arm a panda bear. And I thought, holy crap, why does she have a panda bear on her arm? Well, I know what that meant, so I went looking further. I whipped open my file and I thought, hey, wait a minute here. Let's dig into this panda bear business. And then through the panda bears, I ran into UNESCO and that other group who actually World Wildlife Group uses a panda bear in their logo. So let me not bury the lead. Let me tell you what I've been thinking about pandas, just off the cuff, okay? First of all, China owns all the pandas in the world, which seems kind of suspect to me, right? Just like the Queen supposedly owned all the swans over in England. So I went to ChatGPT for this one. In general, regular people cannot have direct access to pandas as they are a protected species and it is illegal to own them without proper permits and facilities. So what are pandas? Well, pandas, they said there's certain places where people can interact with pandas under supervision. So in the United States, some zoos have panda exhibits where visitors can see pandas up close, but direct interaction is typically not controlled. It is important to note that these interactions are always supervised by professionals to ensure the safety of both the pandas and the people. And I also I'll go through my links that I have down below for you. There are a lot of pictures of celebrities hanging out with panda bears. Imagine that, right? Well, panda bears live in a remote area, kind of hard just to kind of wander up to some mountain terrain in China and visit panda bears, right? They claim that panda bears don't reproduce and have much of an interest in sex, so they don't have many panda bears. So evidently on TikTok right now, the kids are talking about fake panda bears. They're claiming that panda bears are really people wearing panda bear suits. Well, a couple things about panda bears. One, here's my feeling about it. Panda bears are actually from the bear family, right? So we're clear. These are bears we're looking at, right? They just happen to be smaller bears than big bears, right? So I offer you this question. Is it possible that they took these bears, a group of them that had primarily white fur bears or black, excuse me, let me think of primarily white fur bears and reproduced them and gave them hormones to stunt their growth. I mean, they're always doing all of this hormone growth business, right? So, and hormones actually dull out their sense of sex. So, is it because these panda bears have been given hormones to keep them shorter in stature? Because they are bears, they're just shorter bears. So, evidence cited in support of fake panda bears includes the facts that pandas are persistently clumsy, are ostensibly carnivores, which is very interesting. They're carnivores, but they live on a diet of bamboo. Was it the hormones that made them change their diet? Don't know. They're famously bad at reproducing. And it went on to say, if you're going to fake a species with a group of costume wearing actors, pandas might be the sort of animal you pretend to be. If it is a conspiracy or not, then it's a fairly elaborate one. And remember, two things can be true at the same time. Some pandas can be fake and some pandas can be real, right? There are roughly 650 pandas in zoos and other captive animal facilities around the world, each of which would have to have a person inside. Keeping that many suits filled around the clock would require a couple thousand people working in shifts, and that's without accounting for people designing, building, and maintaining the suits. Also, added to that, the design of a system for consuming and temporarily storing bamboo, because visitors need to see the pandas eating, construction of enclosures, zoo staff, documentary crews, biologists, and other scientists, all of whom would need to be fooled or are in on the ruse. Well, I wouldn't have a hard time thinking these scientists were in on the ruse, right? So how hard would it take to stunt a bear? And then you use dye. You dye those black marks on these bears. You put all panda bears have black eyes, rings around their eyes. Okay, that's what distinguishes a panda bear, their short stature and those rings around their eyes. So, yeah, they're tightly controlled. I think they're just small bears is what they are, and somehow they're the mascot for this horrific child sex that's going on. So, the black and white bear is the iconic symbol of the World Wildlife Fund and has been referred to as an endangered animal. World Wildlife Fund uses that on their logo. I could think of a million dark reasons. Remember, I worked in marketing. A lot of effort goes into designing these logos. The fact that the World Wildlife Fund has a panda for their logo is both alarming and horrifying, both at the same time, particularly with the cast of characters running things. So let's get into that. World Wildlife, that's a mouthful for me, Fund. The Worldwide Fund for Nature was established in 1961 by a group of passionate and committed individuals who sought to secure the funding necessary to protect places and species that were threatened by human development. The idea was shared with Max Nicholson, Director General of British government agency Nature Conservatory, who enthusiastically took up the challenge. Nicholson drafted a plan in April 1961 that served as a basis for WWF's founding. So, the founders of WWF include Guy Montfort, Godfrey A. Rockefeller, Edward Max Nicholson, Peter Scott, Julian Huxley. Boy, that's a name we've heard before. Who exactly is Julian Huxley, who started the WWF? Well, let's take a look here and refresh our memories. Sir Julian Sorrel Huxley, born 1887, died 1975, was a British evolutionary biologist, eugenicist, and internationalist. So what is a eugenicist doing in the WWF was my blazing question. He was a proponent of natural selection and a leading figure in the mid-20th century modern synthesis. He was secretary of the Zoological Society of London and the first director of UNESCO. He was also a founding member of the World Wildlife Fund. Also, listen up here. Julian Huxley was also the president of the British Eugenics Society from 1959 to 1962 and the first president of the British Humanist Society. So, Prince Bernard of Lippe, this Prince Bernard dude, okay, here we get the royals in there, helped to fund the WWF, becoming the first president in 1961. In 1963, the foundation held a conference and published a major report warning of anthropogenic global warming. Boy, they were ahead of the curve on that deal, right? And then around 1970, they did the financial thing for WWF. Prince Bernard resigned his post after being involved in some bribery scandal. So, how'd they get that logo? WWF's giant panda logo originated from a panda named Chi-Chi that had been transferred from Beijing Zoo to London Zoo in 1958, 3 years before WWF was established. Being famous as the only panda residing in the Western world at the time, her uniquely recognizable physical features and status as an endangered species were seen as ideal to serve the organization's need for a strong, recognizable symbol that would overcome all language barriers. The organization also needed an animal that would have an impact in black and white printing. The logo was then designed by Sir Peter Scott from Preliminary Sketches. So I have a link down below. The logo changed over the years, and the first logo had a little dot. They had the eyes drawn in as black, and they had a little dot of white in the middle of the eye. Then the rest of the logos became just solid black eyes. Okay, you'll understand why I'm talking about black eyes. So the environmentalist movement was formed by Sir Julian Huxley, who was the founder of the Eugenics Society. The WWF and these other organizations are actually offshoots of that Eugenics Society. Now, this has huge implications for developing countries. Is that the intention behind the environmentalist scam behind the global warming swindle? So they have all these plans. They said the WWF is implementing an agenda to consolidate 200 eco-regions worldwide and is one of the largest contributors to depopulation efforts worldwide. Both of these planks coincide with U.S. State Department memos from 1974 penned by Henry Kissinger. Indeed, Julian Huxley was a top eugenicist from a very eugenics-friendly family. After eugenics was stripped of its good name in the post-World War II, Huxley coined the term transhumanism to encompass eugenical beliefs into a general belief in human advancements through scientific process. Now, isn't that interesting? You have all these people on social media blabbing away about transhumanism, and I haven't heard anybody make a peep about this. A number of other notable WWF heads may reveal some of the agenda at hand. Prince Bernard of the Netherlands served as the first president of the fund from 1962 to 1976 and is certainly a nefarious character. He not only founded the Bilderberg Group, a shadowy organization that is pursuing world government and heavily influences the agenda of nearly every nation in the Western world. Bernard is also a former Nazi SS officer. It is quite true that any radical eugenics policy will be for many years politically and psychologically impossible. It will be important for UNESCO to see that the eugenics problem is examined with the greatest care and that the public mind is informed of the issues at stake so that much that is now unthinkable may at least become thinkable, said Julian Huxley. Well, I think what I've done here, I just interplanted. I'm really talking about WWF and UNESCO. Is it going to be perfect? Do I have them all in order? No, not hardly. Okay. So additionally, a new economy springs up. So what they're doing, let me back up here. I passed something. So So, interestingly enough, the WWF represents the birth of the green movement, which we can now see was started by eugenicists whose goals are to reduce the world's population. So WWF started all all this stuff. This is colonial conservation is when an outside conservation organization like the WWF decides to create a new park to conserve land, and in doing so, they displace local people from land and employ guards to protect that land. It is really quite a scam. I got to tell you, it is something else, but I'll keep reading here. Additionally, a new economic group springs up around the land, which is often harmful to the land and makes it worse off than before it became a park. As Survival explains, other profit making enterprises, including mining, trophy hunting, logging, etc., are often established inside the protective zones. Often, this is with the collusion of big conservation organizations, which are funded by the same industries. So this is pretty catchy, right? So basically, they go in and they declare an area park. Oh, it's so beautiful. We must declare this to be a park so that everybody forever can visit this park. But really, what they're looking to do is mining, trophy hunting, and logging. In fact, in Congo, the WWF partnered with the logging company Rogier to advance sustainable forestry in Africa. However, Survivor says the logging is conducted again without tribal people's permission and is in fact unsustainable. Additionally, the presence of armed guards on the newly conserved land leads to altercations, violence, and even the death of tribal people who try to enter the land they once roamed freely on. Survival says tribal people also then become more easily corrupted by guards or others to participate in the illegal wildlife trade. Colonial conservation is based on the fantasy of tribal people as noble savages, as Survival explains. The fact that local, tribal, indigenous people are the best guardians of the environment can no longer be dismissed as noble, savage fantasy. It's been proven time and time again. Big conservation organizations must start approaching local people humbly and fairly, recognizing their superior knowledge on guardian and as guardians of their own environment and offering them well, that's never going to happen. Okay, so let me scroll down here. There are some interesting ones, and this is just from 2020, okay, just to highlight what goes on in some of these parks. There's a park called Kaziranga, Kazri, no, excuse me, let me start over. Kaziranga. The title is Kanzagaraza, the park that shoots people to protect rhinos. Kasgarawa is densely populated like the rest. This is in India. Many of the communities here are local groups that have lived in or alongside the forest for centuries, collecting firewood as well as herbs and other plants from it. They say increasing numbers of innocent villagers are being shot. And another article from 2017, Indian African women living near national parks are being sterilized. An in-depth investigation by Zambia has revealed that women are being sterilized and shoot at sight orders are being executed in and around protected areas in Africa and India. According to the report, leading conservation group WWF for Nature was giving in tactic support to these activities. So there's a lot of articles here, and what the WWF said. We are appalled by the observations and allegations of the report. Although it is vital the forests are protected from escalating environmental pressures, it cannot come at any cost to indigenous people, their communities, traditions, or livelihoods. We know the best way to protect many of the remaining critical landscapes on the planet and is working with the communities that live there. Yeah, of course they know the best way. It said the draft report was based on a field mission in early 2019 and argued that it contained inaccuracies. The report does not reflect the current position on the ground. We have worked tirelessly in recent months with all concerned to overhaul practices regarding community engagement and help ensure indigenous groups participate in finding solutions, ensure their way of life is not under threat due to conservation efforts. We are especially distressed by concerns around the relationship between Republic of Congo employed rangers and local. You see how they're starting to distance themselves here, right? Okay. You always want to use distancing language. Okay, so I'll read it again. This is from WWF. We are especially distressed by concerns around the relationship between Republic of Congo employed rangers and local communities, including allegations of abuse. Any breach of our social policies and commitments is unacceptable, and we will take all actions needed. A UNDP spokesman added, this report was triggered by complaints that were reviewed in October 2018. Following an initial assessment of the allegations, UNDP suspended the project in March 2019. We are not able to comment on the findings as the report has been published. See, what happens is they get caught, right? They get caught and then they make changes. So this WWF and this UNESCO, I'm going to say what I hear everybody saying. Somebody should do something about this. when I'm scanning around the comments, every once in a while I read somebody says, "Wow, this is really horrible. Why doesn't somebody do something about it?" And to that I would add, well, maybe that somebody is one of us, right? Maybe we need to take over these things and learn them and understand them and also acknowledge how they happened and where they went wrong. So it is my effort in sharing with you this WWF and the UNESCO part. These could be multiple books, okay? The abuse to these people is so horrific. And when I get to the end part about why the black eyes, you will understand why I'm covering all of this background. At a U.S. congressional hearing last week, this is around 2018 or so, WWF was accused of refusing to take responsibility for its failure to meet its human rights commitments at national parks in Africa and Asia. WWF not only knew about abuses allegedly committed by the rangers it funded and supported, but also mischaracterized a 2020 independent review as exonerating the organization. See, what happens is if they were ever to admit anything, imagine that. Their buddy lawyers would descend. That's why they hide all this stuff, right? That's why they never pay compensation typically, because that would open the floodgates. And remember, their one goal in life is to steal land and rape children. Now, of course, I'm oversimplifying things, but if you want to just steal land and rape children and do all kinds of nefarious things, you don't want all these other things getting into your way now, do you? So WWF insists that the rangers in question were government employees of the countries in which it operated, even though it funded and equipped them. Gee, where have we heard that before? Maybe Israel? And effectively ran the national parks where they were employed. WWF is criticized for the practice of fortress conservation, where indigenous peoples and local communities are displaced from their ancestral lands to create pristine, protected areas, also involving the abuse of their human rights. Okay, and also, BuzzFeed did an excellent multi-part investigation, which I have linked below also. In 2019, BuzzFeed News published a series of investigative articles alleging that WWF financed and equipped park rangers accused of torturing, raping, and killing dozens of people at 6 national parks that it managed or co-managed in Cameroon, Congo, Nepal, and India. Facing pressure from the U.S. government, WWF commissioned. See, this is they always put the criminal in the criminal in the fox in the hen house, right? So the WWF commissioned an independent panel of experts chaired by Navi Pillay, a former UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, to determine whether it played a role in the abuses. A systematic review of the organization's practices were also conducted. The final report was published in November 2020. In his written testimony to the Congressional Committee, Knox, who served on the International Review Panel, now spoke in individual capacity. According to him, while WWF's social policies had strong human rights commitments, its implementation and monitoring of what was occurring on the ground was inconsistent and in some cases ineffective. He said WWF's response to the report at the time was disappointing, as it refused to apologize and accept responsibility for its failure to meet its own human rights commitments in these regions. Good for him for speaking out. In WWF's statement and management response to the report, the organization expressed deep sorrow. Listen to this distancing. In WWF's statement and management response to the report, the organization expressed deep sorrow for those who had suffered at the hands of government rangers, emphasizing that the panel's report found the accused rangers were not technically employed by WWF. We have worked diligently since the panel released its report to embrace their 79 recommendations, driving change at all levels of the organization, WWF told, reiterating its values and commitments to human rights. Almost a year later, WWF's position remains the same. At last week's congressional hearing, WWF refused to take responsibility for the alleged violations of human rights brought against it after members of the committee called on it to do so. Shortly before, WWF's Senior Vice President of Wildlife Conservation, Jeanette Hemsley, testified at the hearing. Somebody urged WWF to admit that it was at fault, calling its refusal to do so embarrassing. Democrat Jared Huffman, chair of the Subcommittee on Water, Oceans, and Wildlife, also criticized WWF for not accepting responsibility over its failure. And I'm pretty sure the U.S. gives a lot of money to WWF. So here again, empty words, right? So they failed to meet it while equipping the rangers and patrolling with them in the knowledge of the human rights abuse allegations. If organizations like WWF want to continue their work, Huffman said, they need to be held accountable for their actions. But Hemsley distanced the organization from the allegations. According to her, WWF condemns human rights abuses wherever they occur and does all it can to support communities and hold governments accountable in their human rights obligations. In the Central African Republic, it helps manage a special reserve which employs mostly indigenous Baka people through eco-terrorism opportunities. In Africa, WWF testified it has built free health facilities, supported local women, provided indigenous children with scholarships, supported hundreds of local development committees, and created more than 70 community forests with hunting zones. Notably, Hemsley said, the instances of government park rangers committing human rights abuses were not only intolerable, but the independent panel of experts found no evidence of WWF staff being involved in those crimes. So what happens with all this stuff? Well, this conservation stuff, right? They go in there saying they're going to conserve things, right? Well, first thing, according to this analysis, 250,000 individuals that they're reporting on, right, were displaced in 15 countries from 1990 to 2014. That's a lot of land stealing, just a lot of land stealing. Some indigenous and local people who have tried to regain access to those lands have faced violence or detention. An investigation by Rainforest Foundation UK, let me see, reported being victims of physical violence by eco guards or the soldiers working with them. While indigenous people are forcefully displaced from their ancestral territories, they often lack proper alternatives as their culture, way of life, and material and spiritual well-being are tied to those lands. Fortress conservation in itself is a human rights abuse. They have a right to their lands. This displacement of indigenous people then leads to a host of other human rights abuses. WWF, and let me scroll down here. Is it WWF government funded? Activities involving armed guards account for 3% of the, well, keep in mind one thing on these nonprofits. I served on a board of Humane Society years ago. It is very easy, it is accepted, and it is kind of encouraged. And that was a dispute that I ended up having that took me off of that board because manipulating the funds is actually encouraged. Okay. What they do is they put a lot of money over into education and dicey areas that, yeah, I was on the board of the Palo Alto Humane Society and I very much disagreed with shuffling funds around. So that is how these things work. So just because they say that 3% is for the guards, let's just not go, oh yeah, okay, it's got to be the truth. So activities involving armed guards account for 3% of the total funding WWF has received from the U.S. government since 2004. Why is WWF bad? The WWF fund is one of the largest and most recognizable conservation. See, they use the word conservation, but really it's about theft, right? But as with any massive, deep-pocketed organization, the WWF has been riddled with corruption. Beyond corruption, the WWF has been tied to human rights atrocities throughout the planet. Global conservation charity WWF has been accused of funding and working with anti-poaching guards who allegedly tortured and killed people in national parks in Asia and Africa. It says it is commissioning an independent review according to this BuzzFeed things. Does WWF help animals? From elephants to polar bears, WWF fights to secure a future for animals on the planet we all share. WWF helped bring back the Amur tiger and Africa's black rhino from the edge of extinction. Is WWF not for profit? WWF is a non-profit organization dedicated to environmental conservation through science. Is WWF successful? From its origin as a small group of committed wildlife enthusiasts, WWF has grown into one of the world's largest and more respected independent conservation organizations, supported by 5 million people and active in over 100 countries in 5 continents. WWF are rated as the most trusted nonprofit partners for corporations. Why is the WWF logo a panda? The inspiration came from that Chi-Chi. So, let me scroll down here a bit. Why does WWF protect animals? We protect wildlife because they inspire us. And I've got this from their website. But we also focus our efforts on those species like tigers, rhinos, whales, and marine turtles whose protection influences and supports the survival of other species or offers the opportunity to protect whole landscapes or marine areas. So what they're setting themselves up for is, we love animals, right? So we want to come in and we want to set up this big piece of land so all those animals can roam free. Now, keep in mind, I'm not anti-elephants roaming free, but this is my view of how this scam is working. Draw us in because most people are sympathetic to children and animals, right? People are never going to have a rhino in their neighborhood or in their house. So looking at a rhino on TV and stuff becomes important for some people, right? These parks also become huge tourist destinations. Cha-ching, cha-ching. So, what does WWF do with the money? We are proud to say that 78% of our spending goes on our charitable activities. The other 22% of our spending is for fundraising. They don't really say much. Okay, let's talk about trophy hunting. You think these people are protecting animals, right? You know, where do you think, like in this country, they have trophy hunting? There's big places in Texas and places, right? Where you can pay hundreds of thousands of dollars if you're rich and go there and hunt a tiger or something, right? Get pictures next to that tiger. Well, where do they get a lot of these tigers and stuff from at these trophy places? Well, most of them are so docile that these are not fair hunters, right? Anybody can hunt down a tiger if it has nowhere to go, right? And usually zoos are the beginning point for these animals, right? Because they put them into zoos to conserve them, right? Supposedly. And then people visiting zoos want to see baby animals. So what they do is they like to breed animals in zoos. Well, they can't keep all those animals in zoos, now can they? So those animals get shipped off to cheap circuses in Mexico, or they might end up on one of these trophy hunting places. So not a good deal because really I looked into these things, a lot years ago. And those animals that these so-called hunters are hunting, well, anybody could shoot a old tired tiger, okay? So, okay. So, trophy hunting support. This is perhaps the most glaring contradiction for an organization that prides itself on saving endangered species. Up until 2020, the WWF has been open. Now they're probably not so open about it, about supporting trophy hunting and trapping as a conservation practice. I never understood that. All these we got to go out and kill those ducks. There's too many deer out there. Let's go out and kill them all. These people just have this urge to kill anything, don't they? While stating to be against all illegal and species endangered hunting, the organization has long supported hunting for managed conservation and sport. In 2009, the WWF wrote in support of Namibia's black rhino hunting. They made a recent U-turn. Well, of course, because people are wise to them, right? The recent U-turn on the hunting issue might still leave environmentalists and animal lovers put off by the organization's mission altogether. Used for greenwashing practices. Friends in high places don't always mean better advocacy. The WWF has long been the go-to charity unsustainable corporations choose to support to help their image. Let me see what the time is looking like here. Oh, okay. I'll cut this off in a bit. It's probably going to be 2 parts today. Okay, so let me see. Some of the biggest corporations behind today's WWF's biggest donors. These include Monsanto, Coca-Cola, Shell, and BP. This not only creates a troubling conflict of interest, but also helps give these companies a greener image through their connection to the WWF. This is a type of greenwashing. You'll hear that word greenwashing, okay? They do that with their plane mileages too. For the corporations, it's a win-win. They get somewhat absolved of their environmental responsibilities without being pushed to take any concrete steps towards change. So the WWF is the world's largest conservative organization. They have invested $1 billion in more than 12,000 conservation initiatives since 1995. Beyond corruption, the WWF has been tied to human rights atrocities throughout the planet. The WWF is one of the most well-funded nonprofits in the environmental movement, with hundreds of millions of dollars flowing in each year. Some of the largest donors: David and Lucille Packard Foundation, they're from HP, Rockefeller Foundation, and the New Venture Fund, Dark Money. Okay. For many years, WWF hired rangers in foreign countries to help enforce anti-poaching policies, according to the BuzzFeed report. And I encourage you to, those BuzzFeed reports are good. Now, I'm not going to say anything bad about them, but I will remind you of one thing, okay? Don't ever just dive deep headfirst into the report. Say, oh, these people, they got it. No, take a look for yourself, okay? Because although this report is extraordinary and it's fantastic, right? Is this report being done to get the first foot in the door of all the abuses, and are they whitewashing them themselves? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe this is totally innocent. Maybe somebody's really doing this. Or are they leaving a lot of things out? When I get to the end here, you would have to agree. Well, I agree with me, so I don't know if you're going to agree with me or not, but this all leads up to something really horrific. So, rather than stepping in to stop the atrocities, WWF lobbied to have the charges dropped against Rangers, and even celebrated when Rangers were released without charges. Shortly after the report was released, WWF denied any wrongdoings, but commissioned this independent thing. Nearly a year later, yeah, they did their own report. I think I talked about that earlier, so I'm not going to go into this. Okay, WWF has been accused of creating conservation refugees by forcing nature tribes out of their land to protect the wildlife residing nearby, even though the tribes and wildlife have cohabitated in the same region for centuries. There's this group called Survival International, a group that defends tribal rights, said that WWF forbade tribes from hunting in areas they had hunted for centuries, despite there being scant evidence that the tribes were damaging any of the animal populations in those regions. After tribes were booted from their land, the WWF often uses that very land to pad its own pocket by leading tours, typically selling for $10,000 a pop to wealthy individuals so they can fill Jeeps up and go see the wildlife that WWF is protecting. That's something else, isn't it? Get all those people over there riding around in Jeeps while the poor. And they're all paid a lot of money. They have millions of assets. In total, the organization has more than 375 million that we know of in net assets, including ownership of a massive building in Washington, D.C. that rents out office space to many prominent figures, including President Barack Obama, the enemy of the world. Let the black guy go and abuse the black people. The organization has plenty of celebrity ties. Actor Leonardo DiCaprio is a member of WWF's board of directors. DiCaprio is known for both his environmental preaching and his failure to live up to it. While a healthy bank account with some rich friends, one would think WWF is the last group that would need taxpayer funding, but that's not the case. WWF has collected more than 157 million in federal grants over the past 15 years to oversee USAID programs abroad. While the WWF is fond of protecting pandas, they're also pretty fond of protecting its pocketbook. So somebody wrote a book called The Silence of the Pandas, detailing the ways in which WWF International raked in cash from major corporations in exchange for the WWF grant to grant a sustainable accreditation to the corporations. The WWF was outraged by the book and immediately launched a legal campaign to prevent the book from ever hitting the shelves. I'm gonna let me see here. They have so many crimes. I'm just gonna the organizations targeted bottled water. Let me see, anti-plastic organizations. Unlike they're not opposed to hunting, the organization has hunted with groups like that. Ducks. I never understood that Ducks Unlimited. Why do they have to go out and kill all those ducks every year to encourage responsible hunting globally? While supporting hunting is not a bad position, the WWF has been selective in who is allowed to hunt. For example, Juan Carlos, the King of Spain and an honorary president of WWF, sparked outrage after he went on an elephant hunt in 2012 despite WWF's efforts to protect elephants. On the other hand, African tribes have been forbidden from hunting land their people had hunted for generations because WWF declared the land an animal refuge. It seems WWF supports hunting for wealthy members of its leadership, but not for tribal hunters who have been chased from their land in the name of conservation. The WWF has been criticized for turning a blind eye to China's human rights abuses and persistent pollution in exchange for an invitation to have offices in China. So this could go on for a million years, but let me get to the good part here. Always pay attention to these groups. The WWF receives large donations from corporations seeking to greenwash their businesses. This is linked to the 1001 Club. They funded guards who killed, sexually assaulted, beat, and tortured scores of people. The 1001 Club, let me see what this is. The claim here is that WWF is funded by elites. These are a group of 1001 people who influence strategic decisions made by the charity. The WWF runs an elite club of 1001 of the richest people in the world whose names are not revealed. Industrialists, philanthropists, and ultra-conservative upper-class naturalists, they are said to make up an old boys network with influence in the corridors of global and corporate and policy-making power. And remember, recently I've been talking about the mapping of minerals around the world. So they're mapping particularly Africa for all the minerals. So I suspect, just a little bit suspicious here, I suspect with all this mapping for minerals, this is all going to play into that. And keep in mind, the mapping for minerals in Africa is going to be a horrific deal for the people because most people only own above ground rights. The below ground rights are where the minerals are, right? So they have rigged the system so that most people in Africa only own the above ground rights. The 1001 Club is still important for the WWF, even though it's not a secret central committee. And they went on to say, but I'm convinced that the discrete 1001 Club still influences the strategic decisions of the WWF because many of its members are important players in global and powerful financial and industrial. And this came from The Guardian. In response to this claim, a WWF spokesperson stated, WWF still has the 1001 Club as one of a number of vehicles for donations to WWF International. So the club is true. Human rights specialists will lead an independent review. And that was from this BuzzFeed thing. The charity is accused of supporting anti-poaching. Yeah, I already talked about that. It also accused of providing paramilitary forces with salaries, training, and supplies, including knives, night vision goggles, riot gear, and batons, and funding raids on villages. WWF operated like a global spy master, organizing, financing, and running networks of informants to provide park authorities with intelligence while publicly denying working with informants, BuzzFeed reported. The investigation will also look at WWF embroiled itself in a botched arms deal in the Central African Republic to buy assault rifles from an army that paraded severed heads of criminals throughout and that also came from The Guardian in 2019. All this stuff is pretty recent, if you ask me. WW's response to this claim was, at the heart of WWF's work are places and the people who live in them. Respect for human rights is at the core of our mission. We take any allegations seriously and are commissioning an independent review to look into these cases. We have asked BuzzFeed to share all evidence it has obtained to support these claims to help inform and strengthen this review. So, the WWF supports trophy hunting. I already talked about that. Because, and this is, I'll be talking, UNESCO is where the science people come from, right? But they also cross-connect with WWF. The WWF is dedicated to protecting the world's wildlife by directing its conservation efforts toward protecting endangered species and addressing global threats. And it's written in such a way that, I mean, if you said, well, I don't really support the WWF, people go, what the hell's wrong with you? What is wrong with protecting elephants? And hidden behind that is rape and abuse and theft. So, yeah, because conservation, endangered spaces, not species, spaces. They call them toward protecting endangered species. That would be all those parks and stuff, right? WWF operates at the forefront of science and policy debates, but also at the front lines of marine conservation, where people's source of income depends exclusively on there being enough fish in the sea. Supporting communities into securing coastal livelihoods and restoring fish stocks is central to our strategy. WWF works with governments, partners, and the private sector to design and implement a true sustainable blue economy to ensure that the ocean economy contributes to prosperity and the resilience of coastal communities today and long into the future. They sound like such respectable and reliable folks, now don't they? Keep that respectable and reliable thing in your head, okay? And they have all these big plans that how they're gonna protect things. They're partners with the UN. They have a Washington, D.C. location. This is a good one. WWF was declared undesirable in Russia. Russia's prosecutor general on Wednesday, I'm sorry, I don't know what date, it just been a couple of years ago, declared that WWF Fund for Nature, also known as World Wildlife Fund, is undesirable. Moscow accused the Switzerland-based nonprofit of working on behalf of the U.S. against Russia's economic and security interests, especially in the Arctic. The Prosecutor General's office said that the WWF used environmental and educational activities as a cover for implementing projects that pose security threats in the economic sphere. Pretty interesting. So what happened after this BuzzFeed expose, right? It just kind of ended recently. We're still talking about this stuff, right? Well, I'll have the link below. It's called WWF Secret War, WAR. Well, what'd they do? Well, they replaced their president. And what shining star did they put in place? Well, did they put in place somebody who loved animals? Well, maybe they love animals, but I think they love money more. The new president is Pavan Schulbeck. Spent much of his career at Deutsche Bank. Deutsche Bank? Go look at Deutsche Bank. Pretty big criminals. I mean, there's a lot of shows about criminal activity at Deutsche Bank, okay? I'm not going to get into it now, but of all the banks that I remember on my list of things in my head, they run across as far as criminals, Deutsche Bank is kind of toward the top of my head. So he spent much of his career at Deutsche Bank and ended up as a managing director. He is the founder of GIS Advisory, a Swiss-based consulting firm providing impact analysis solutions, helping investors and companies measure, value, and compare the impacts of externalities on 4 types of capital: natural, human, social, and financial. Whew. He was also awarded the 2011 McCluskey Fellowship by Yale University. Well, that's their boy. I didn't look to see if he's a woman, though. In 2007, if you're looking to find out if these guys are really men or if they're women, always look at who they're married to, because they're usually married to somebody who's a lot more obvious. The men are harder to pick out, but look to who they're married to, and then the truth will come out. So he became president of WWE in 2017 after his illustrious future at Deutsche Bank. Well, I'm going to be taking a break here. I am still not sure if I'm going to be doing this in two segments or if I will get help and put it into one segment. So, because I'm not sure, just look for those numbers because I want to start on UNESCO, another major, major criminal organization. So, I will put this on hold for now.
For millennia, sociocultural evolution has been expressed through creating and building, whether it be temples, theatres, monuments, sculptures, or any other work of art. These masterpieces help to shape our identity, and yet they're often damaged or even destroyed as a result of armed conflict. This destruction can have catastrophic consequences for current and future generations. In 1954, in the aftermath of the massive destruction of cultural property in the Second World War, the international community unanimously recognized the importance of protecting cultural properties from irreversible damage. And in the spirit of universal responsibility, the Convention for the Protection of Cultural Property in the Event of Armed Conflict was born, now broadly referred to as the 1954 Hague Convention. It is the first international treaty with a worldwide vocation focusing on the protection of cultural heritage in the event of an armed conflict. The Convention protects movable or immovable property of great importance to international cultural heritage, such as monuments and architecture, archaeological sites, buildings of historical or artistic interest, buildings dedicated to religion, manuscripts, books, and other objects of artistic, historical, or archaeological value, as well as scientific collections and important collections of archives. The 1954 Hague Convention explicitly prohibits the use of cultural property for purposes which are likely to expose it to destruction or damage in the event of armed conflict, and requires all states parties to refrain from any act of hostility directed against such property. The Convention also requires states parties to foster within their armed forces a spirit of respect for the cultural property of all peoples. A distinctive emblem is used as a symbol to identify and distinguish cultural property during armed conflict. In addition to this, the 1954 Hague Convention has two protocols. The first protocol, among other things, prevents the exportation of cultural property from an occupied territory during hostilities and requires cultural property that has been unlawfully exported to be returned to its original territory. The second protocol, which was adopted in 1999, strengthens the Convention and enhances the protection of cultural heritage in the following ways. It elaborates further on certain terms such as military necessity and preparatory measures, and establishes an enhanced level of protection for cultural property that is of the highest importance for humankind. The protocol also requires states parties to criminalize the deliberate destruction of any cultural property. Furthermore, the 1999 Second Protocol establishes a special fund for the protection of cultural property in the event of armed conflict. This provides emergency assistance to states in their efforts to take preparatory or emergency measures to protect their cultural property. Finally, the Second Protocol establishes a 12-member intergovernmental committee for the protection of cultural property in the event of armed conflict, which is responsible for monitoring the implementation of the protocol.
Well, hello again. I just blew the last recording, so I'm going to be recording this part over again. Always an opportunity, right? Always an opportunity. One thing that I will be doing is for sure I'm putting this into just one file. So, welcome back. Going to keep covering this stuff. Toward the end, I will be covering the point here, and I will make an effort to not get overly graphic. There is no need to get overly graphic. And because I'm recording this again, I may or may not remember what I said in the first recording. I've got a lot of issues now with confusion having to do with radiation. So the next thing I will do is I'll record a 3-year check-in. so you can get a general idea of what living with smart meter radiation starts to look like. Okay, so let's get going. So I believe that anybody who gets to the top, either all the way to the top or part way to the top, is going to be doing this ritual that has to do with children that I'll be talking about at the end here. That is just the reality. Now, do they really get to the top just because they cooperate? Well, no, of course not. This is all a humiliation ritual. So, when I was looking into Davos or WEF, I always try to look at the dates, and this business, there was a show from 8 years ago that said WEF chairman says restoring trust is key to pulling world economy out of crisis. That was 8 years ago. So they were talking about restoring trust back then. They're still talking about it now. It'd be very difficult for this gang of psychopaths to convince people to now trust them, because their ways of presenting this will highly likely be filled with arrogant and controlling words and measures, because after all, psychopaths like high risk, high reward behavior. Look at what attracts them. Things like escalating prices of oil, stock markets, and when all else fails, they bring in the Houthis to shoot them in the Red Sea. This is what attracts them, that level of activity. And then you throw the cocaine in there, and it is a recipe for disaster. As of May 2023, U.S. Customs and Border Protection encountered an average of 435 unaccompanied minors per day. One study suggests that drug cartels and traffickers will exploit 60% of these children in prostitution, forced labor, and child pornography. Not to mention rape. And many of these children are being released into people who are not their relatives. It's like, just sign up for a kid and the U.S. government will deliver it. And 435, this is what they are saying, right? They have a long, long history of not exactly keeping track of things. An interesting thing that keeps happening, and it happened again last week, Joe Biden, who I don't believe is going to be president much longer, he referred to this country as an experiment. They're always referring to it as an experiment. So, one thing that I missed about this Julian Huxley person, this is why I'm always screaming, start at the beginning. Who knew that Julian Huxley was into all these things, right? Okay, so let me recap the first part. He was secretary of the Zoological Society of London, the first director of UNESCO, a founding member of the World Wildlife Fund, the president of the British Eugenics Society, and the first president of the British Humanist Association. And I didn't know what humanist meant when I read it previously, so I went and I looked. When I started this little adventure almost 20, 25 years ago, I didn't know any of this stuff. That is why I kept looking. People act like, well, didn't you already know that? Well, no, I didn't already know it. Why do you think I'd be looking if I already knew it, right? So there should be no shame in your game for admitting that you didn't know something and then going and looking. That is how we learn, because people will make comments like, well, how could you not have known that? Well, I just told you that I didn't know it, okay? So now I'm looking for some answers. So don't shame other people when they're looking for information, is my point here. So anyway, so this humanist thing, British Humanist Association, what is that? Humanist UK has been active in arguing for voluntary euthanasia and the right to obtain an abortion. It has always sought an open society in which people of fundamentally different views cooperate in shared and neutral institutions for the common good. So, Huxley is well-rounded in this eugenics thing. Huxley had a brother, and the brother wrote the book Brave New World, dystopian book. I haven't read it. It was previous to 1984, another dystopian book, which I did read. So the Huxley family is really something else, right? They definitely want to get rid of the rest of us. So what's UNESCO? United Nations Education, Scientific, and Cultural. I believe that UNESCO holds a lot of power, so we need to learn about UNESCO. Is a specialized agency of the UN with the aim of promoting world peace and security through international cooperation in education, arts, sciences, and culture. It has 194 member states and 12 associate members, as well as partners in the non-governmental, intergovernmental, and private sector. Headquartered in Paris, France, UNESCO has 53 regional offices and 199 national commissions. UNESCO was founded in 1945 as the successor to the League of Nations International Committee on Intellectual Cooperation. Its constitution establishes the agency's goals, governing structures. So UNESCO is a big deal having to do with these sciences, right? UNESCO sponsors projects that improve literacy, but while they're improving literacy, UNESCO is the group that would be changing the school books around and rewriting the history, right? UNESCO's activities have broadened over the years. It assists in the translation and dissemination of world literature, helps establish and secure World Heritage Sites of cultural and natural importance. So UNESCO is, as it turns out, a huge, huge deal. And I covered them in the show that I did about photos and castles. And I did find a link for that show, so it will be down below. I think that UNESCO was founded to kick off the New World Order. And here's why I think it. So, UNESCO and its mandate for international cooperation can be traced back to a League of Nations resolution on 21 September 1921 to elect a commission to study the feasibility of having nations freely share cultural, educational, and scientific achievements. This new body, the International Committee on Intellectual Cooperation, or ICIC, was created in 1922 and counted such figures as Henri Bergson, Albert Einstein, Marie Curie. And so the International Institute for Intellectual Cooperation, so then they found this other group, but the bottom line is here. So it was created in Paris, this other group. However, the onset of World War I largely interrupted the work of these predecessor organizations. So they really didn't get going on this New World Order stuff until the early 1920s. And it looks to me like they picked it back up again after World War II. And in looking at that show that I did, as far as the photos and the UNESCO sites, well, I didn't know at the time all the horror that's caused by them, because out of that show, it helped me get a timeline for how long this has likely been going on. And I still stand by, I believe they took over the game board around the late 1700s. So, because UNESCO is aimed to promote international collaboration through education, science, and culture. But then they said UNESCO does not have any direct control over doctors or medical professions. But they have this one thing that I want you to pay attention to. Is called the International Bioethics Committee, or IBC, and that provides guidance. While it may not be able to control them, it certainly provides guidance, right? So UNESCO's International Bioethics Committee, IBC, provides guidance on ethical issues related to medicine and life sciences. The IBC is composed of 36 members who are appointed by the Director General of UNESCO and serve in their personal capacities for 4-year terms. The members are selected based on cultural diversity, balanced geographical representation, and nominations from states of qualified specialists in the life sciences and in the social and human sciences, including law, human rights, philosophy, education, and communication. So this IBC is monstrous, okay, by covering all of those things: social and human sciences, law, human rights, philosophy, education, and communication. The IBC's work includes examining ethical issues related to medical research, clinical practice, and public health, among other topics. So what goes on at these UNESCO sites? Well, mass tourism at listed sites. Several cases illustrate the problematic nature of UNESCO's heritage protection measures. Very often, the principle of world cultural heritage is diverted from its official purpose and used to promote tourism or for political and economic reasons. In this study of UNESCO's heritage policies, this anthropologist took a look at this one place, and one of the contradictory consequences of UNESCO protection is intense tourism development, negative outcomes for local populations. Prestigious as it is, the list of World Heritage sites can also negatively affect sections of the local population. And I'll just be giving you a couple of examples here. In Panama City, the 1997 listing of the historic Casco Viejo neighborhood relegated its poorest inhabitants to the city limits. Meanwhile, the Central District became a tourist attraction. At the time, the Casco Viejo was a rundown neighborhood. It underwent a radical transformation, resulting in the brutal eviction of people from the poorest classes whose windows were boarded in attempts to force them out while the surrounding neighborhood was restored and gentrified.
The World Wildlife Fund for Nature is the world's largest conservation organization, with a stated mission to create a world in which people and wildlife thrive together.
This is not about saving one panda, one forest, or one habitat. This is no act of charity. It's an act of survival.
But in 2019, accusations emerged that they had funded park rangers that were implicated in murder, torture, and rape. In the Salonga National Park in the Democratic Republic of Congo, indigenous peoples speak of suffering beatings, rape, and murder at the hands of guards.
WWF DRC is extremely involved in the running of the park. It wasn't until a year later that one of the more senior people in WWF DRC asked, what's happening with this? He found out that the park director and the country director had blocked further investigation, and that they did so pretty clearly because they were concerned about adversely affecting their relationship with the government.
Other examples of WWF-linked human rights abuses have emerged in the Central African Republic, the Republic of Congo, and in Cameroon.
The guards, they can set fire on the camp to say the fire belongs to a poacher. But sometimes it is a camp of the Baka communities.
WWF staff members on the ground in Cameroon were aware of abuses by eco guards and didn't address those complaints, but WWF international staff continued to ignore the reports of instances of rape, of murder, of torture, particularly of indigenous communities.
The illegal wildlife industry is estimated to be worth up to $23 billion a year. It's the world's fourth largest illicit market, and it's run by violent organized crime groups ready to go to war with anyone who gets in their way.
He tried to shoot me, like this, he says.
In its efforts to stamp out poaching, the WWF has supported governments and co-sponsored forest rangers which provide cash, weapons, training, and high-tech enforcement equipment. But these anti-poaching units now stand accused of carrying out atrocities against indigenous communities. So how did this happen? How did an organization which aims to preserve animal life and biodiversity end up accused of supporting groups that rape and murder? This is the story of the WWF's system error. Founded in 1961, the World Wildlife Fund for Nature was created to support the work of existing conservation groups struggling to save endangered species. The WWF helped fund many programs around the world, and as early as 1963 published an important paper on the threat of global warming. The organization has since grown exponentially, expanding beyond preserving endangered species to promoting biological diversity and sustainability, reducing pollution, and slowing climate change. But in 2019, a BuzzFeed investigation would starkly challenge the image of the WWF, with accusations they had funded eco-guards that committed human rights abuses and murder.
What the allegations specifically revolved around was beatings, torture, and extrajudicial killings by eco-guards who had been trained and funded by WWF.
In all cases, they were essentially alleging that WWF was funding, despite knowledge of the park rangers, at least allegedly, being involved in human rights abuses, including murder and torture.
John Knox was a member of the independent panel the WWF created to investigate these allegations. What they discovered was that the WWF had a systemic problem that it had chosen to ignore for years.
We didn't find evidence that WWF itself was directly involved in any murders, tortures, or rapes, in the sense that WWF staff members were somehow carrying them out. The WWF, for years, has had very strong commitments on paper to make sure that they're safeguarding human rights. And the problem is they have not put the necessary implementation to do what they say that they'll do.
The organization has not publicly apologized to the victims or their families, while the independent report has cleared WWF staff from direct involvement in the allegations.
There's a kind of sleight of hand there. While they weren't directly directing those abuses and WWF staff were not engaged directly in abuses, they were part of a wider system that led to those abuses.
In other words, offices within WWF always tell each other only the good news. In the DRC, where they simply didn't report the fact that they were receiving serious human rights allegations. But when that report was presented to the international board, they actually made the situation sound better than it really was.
The failure of the WWF to act on serious allegations was repeated in Cameroon, where human rights abuses were also reported.
The failure was on the part of WWF as a whole, as an entire organization. It's the responsibility of WWF International and the WWF International Board of Directors to make sure that these kinds of abuses didn't happen.
The WWF is a federalized organization, meaning that each branch operates independently with supervision from the head office, and different countries have different ways of accepting funding. So although the WWF provides the cash, how that money is spent is often at the discretion of local governments.
WWF DRC co-manages the park, so they're able to provide funding more directly for park management, including park rangers. In other places like India and Nepal, the government is much more, let's say, exclusionary to WWF. So it really varies quite a bit from government to government.
And eco-guards do face very real threats on the ground. Nearly 50 were killed in 2018 alone. They undoubtedly need appropriate equipment and training to face off against the poachers.
These more militarised strategies have led to abuses of local communities and even PTSD amongst rangers, because they believed that they were going to be doing a job that was about wildlife management, and they had roles in kind of ecological monitoring and so on. But then as poaching escalated and as conservation became more militarised, they find themselves drawn into engaging in much more forceful forms of conservation that perhaps they didn't sign up for.
But in some instances, as in the Central African Republic, guards received paramilitary-style training in weapons handling and combat tactics. Without proper oversight, it is believed by many that this training was then turned on innocent people from indigenous communities. And in Cameroon, guards were incentivized to catch poachers, ivory, and weapons with bonuses, increasing the potential for human rights abuses. Charles Nsokali, an indigenous Baka from the DRC, has produced documentaries on the indiscriminate manner in which these park rangers operate.
There was a serious case, what we call the anti-poaching squad. Some go with violence and beat the Baka who are settled in the forest, just to tell them where the poachers are.
They're kind of induced to go after these really bottom-level poachers, but they don't have the resources, and frankly, I think there's political opposition to them going up the line to get the higher-ups, because often those people are quite wealthy and well-connected, and the government doesn't really want to go after them.
Amidst these scandals, the WWF continues to receive funding from major corporations like Coca-Cola and IKEA, seeking to greenwash their image.
It's really hard to see how partnering with some of the world's biggest corporations is going to solve any of the environmental problems that we face. Because those corporations are deeply involved in creating the environmental crisis in the first place. Conservation organisations are in a really highly competitive funding environment, and so of course they were going to turn to corporations to get finance to support their work.
The WWF's problems are not simply issues of poorly trained or corrupt park rangers. There are issues with the organization's entire strategy of advocating for the isolation of protected areas from any human impact.
Historically, the underlying idea of a lot of national parks, starting in the United States with Yosemite and Yellowstone, was that certain areas should be kept completely preserved for future generations. In Africa, the early national parks were colonial game preserves, where people, from Germany or France or the UK wanted to go and be able to hunt. What these things often had in common is that they disregarded the people who already had lived there for many, many generations.
Locally known as fortress conservation, these areas are often run by militarized units that keep locals off the lands where they have lived for generations. Currently, 17% of land on the globe accounts for protected areas, including national parks.
The law in the DRC is that it's illegal to hunt or fish or live in Salonga, and there's pressure to basically move out the remaining villages. There's only a handful left in a park the size of Belgium. There's still pressure from this kind of fortress conservation idea to make the parks a kind of protected natural area that no humans are allowed to step foot in.
This model has since been replicated by countries around the world and recognized through programs such as UNESCO's World Heritage Sites. And now, organizations like the WWF are supporting the expansion of these natural areas through the UN's Convention on Biodiversity, which aims to expand the world's protected areas from 17% to 30% by 2030.
There are a great many of us who are really concerned that this easy banner headline of 30 by 30 will actually give new impetus for possibly the biggest land grab in history, which will result in the violent displacement and eviction of some of the world's poorest people.
Local people are rarely factored into the equation, increasing the potential for conflict and human rights abuses. As indigenous people are run out of their forests, beaten and abused for living their lives the way they have for generations, Reports indicate that animals like elephants, gorillas, and chimpanzees are still in decline.
This does not work for conservation purposes. It's hard to emphasize that enough. There are dozens, hundreds of studies that show that without the support of indigenous peoples and local communities, excluding them simply results in bad conservation outcomes as well as violating their human rights.
But when you don't work together with the baka and you don't leave them freely in the forest, conservationists will not have the objective to know exactly what is going on wrong in the forest.
WWF response is extremely disappointing. WWF did not apologize or even take responsibility for the failures to comply with its responsibility to respect human rights. It continued to point the finger at its government partners and at the difficult conditions in the countries in which it operates. But those can't be excuses.
While the WWF is a federalized organization and some groups continue to do important work, the WWF's push to stay relevant may be further harming its original mission of protecting endangered species, as well as leading to horrific human rights abuses and even murder.
I think WWF's will to survive is something that will definitely continue. It's a big organisation. If they stop tomorrow, would be really negative for people and for biodiversity. It would be much better to be working much more collaboratively and constructively with people who live with wildlife and live in these areas and have done sustainably for generations, rather than trying to impose an externally derived model from experts who don't actually live in those environments.
Okay, luckily I decided to put this into segments because, well, this one show was taking me quite a bit of time. I'd like to start off with this. And so that means that I may have said things in the beginning a few days ago that I may repeat or not remember now. So just hang in there with me. What are they arguing about now? And this will make sense when I get to the bottom line here. What they are doing is they have certain rituals that have to do with raping children. And I'll be discussing some of the methods, but I will not be going overly graphic. I think we all get the point here. But what's interesting is, remember, the men don't have the penis, the women do, okay? So that's why some of these acts, at first, I was like, how does that work? But figured it all out. What they're pushing now, there was this big fight on TV over this book because they're trying to get all these rather crude books put into schools for children. And I'd like to point out just one book because for some reason, these people are fascinated with anal rape, okay? And the book that's in contest is called All Boys Aren't Blue, which contains description of incest, anal rape, and strap-on dildos, among other things. All of this comes right out of the sewer that they built for people, right? I don't think any of us would have thought of rape, pornography, and all of these things. So in order to get compliance, they got other people to enjoy these same disturbing things because that way then they own them, right? Because no one wants the public knowing that you're doing these things to children. There was an interesting thing out of Davos. Abigail Disney, they all played different roles, right? The daughter of Walt Disney, the famous guy who played Adolf Hitler. Abigail Disney articulated the sentiments shared by her wealthy peers. The elites gathered in Davos must take this crisis seriously. Throughout history, pitchforks were the inevitable consequence of extreme discontent. But today, the masses are turning to populism, which is on the rise throughout the world, Disney said in a statement. And then another actor or actress, Cox, said, "We are living in a second Gilded Age. Billionaires are wielding their extreme wealth to accumulate political power and influence, simultaneously undermining democracy and the global economy. It's long time past to act. If our elected officials refuse to address this concentration of money and power, the consequences will be dire." And I had to look up to be sure about what is populism. Populism is a political approach that strives to appeal to ordinary people who feel their concerns are disregarded by established elite groups. And yeah, they're saying, oh, look, the United States got 200 millionaires to pay some money. Well, they have been using this exact same trick for a very long time. So, will people, in fact, come out with pitchforks when they realize that, once again, this is going to be another lie? All you have to do is keep lying, and then you run out the clock, right? Biden says, I'm going to make the millionaires pay their fair share. Well, what is their fair share? What should they be paying for murdering us? What should they be paying for raping our children? What would be the fair share that we're all talking about here, right? Because they've been talking about this restoring trust at Davos for a long time, because I always cross-check dates. And 8 years ago, WEF chairman says restoring trust is key to pulling world economy out of crisis. Well, they're just trying to get ahead of what is looming ahead. Will any of them move out of their mansions to get away from these pitchfork masses? I doubt it. Why do I doubt this? Because psychopaths do not understand who we are. They look down their noses at us. They engage in high risk, high reward behavior. Look at what attracts them. The world is run like a gambling casino, fluctuating oil prices, fluctuating real estate prices, fluctuating stock market prices. Tie off the Red Sea so you can fluctuate shipping prices and blame it on the Houthis. See how it all works? So, yeah, they exist on what attracts them, and what also attracts them is great harm to children. They rigged the books here before all of this mass migration began. And what they did was they made sure that those children would be traveling unaccompanied. And as of this last May 2023, U.S. Customs and Border Protection encountered an average of 435 unaccompanied minors per day. One study suggests that drug cartels and traffickers will exploit 60% of these children in prostitution, forced labor, and child pornography. Yeah, and I doubt this is true because I've shown you time and time again, they're horrible record keepers. So I would suggest this number is so high that it would probably boggle our minds, because they're always talking about this country as an experiment. I heard Biden call the United States an experiment just the other day. Of course, it's an experiment in rape, murder, and robbery, right? So this is why I'm always talking about going to the beginning, because I looked up this Huxley person a little closer. The Huxley person who surrounds all of this. There was one thing that I kind of gleaned past. Huxley was secretary of the Zoological Society of London, the first director of UNESCO, a founding member of the World Wildlife Fund, the president of the British Eugenics Society, and the first president of the British Humanist Association. And I didn't know what that was. I didn't know what any of this stuff was. That's why I look. So that's why I encourage and always look at the beginning. So what is this Humanist UK? They've been active in arguing for voluntary euthanasia and the right to obtain an abortion. The abortion thing, don't even get me started. How we picked up on that and are cheering and screaming for babies to get murdered and aborted is a mystery to me. But hey, we're here, right? It has always sought an open society in which people of fundamentally different views cooperate in shared and neutral institutions for the common good. I think a lot of this was the beginning of the New World Order, all this stuff about getting everybody together to cooperate. It sounds to me, I thought for a while that maybe the United Nations was the kickoff to the New World Order, but this other stuff likely is where it really got started. Because what we're talking about with all this land and UNESCO and all that, it really is what I would call the post-colonial domination of Africans, right? So everybody thinks colonization is over, but then yet we have all these sneaky things going on, right? And the interesting thing, because I found a couple of clips, because I've recorded the show so many times, I didn't want to lose track of things. So I found a couple of clips about UNESCO and the WWF that will tell the story. But part of what those clips didn't tell, which I found really interesting, I found an article from 2018. Did you know that indigenous people control 1/4 of the world's land surface? And 2/3 of that land is essentially natural. Now, I don't know. They say that 370 million people around the world define themselves as indigenous because they're descendants from populations who inhabited a country before the time of conquest or colonization, and who retain at least some of their own social, economic, culture, and political practices. So they said that they have ownership or management rights over more than 1/4 of the world's land surface. That's quite a lot, right? But remember, I just read this key word here. They have the land rights, right? What we're really talking about are the below the surface rights. Most of Africa, I did that show about they're now mapping for minerals. And I don't think that's a good thing for these indigenous people because most of them only own the top rights. They do not own the below the surface rights, where all the things are these people want to steal. So, and at the heart of all this, the minimizing the participation of indigenous peoples and communities in the nomination process for World Heritage Sites, indigenous peoples are denied the right to self-determination. Such negligence causes devastating harm to the economic resources and livelihoods of affected communities and prevents them from accessing cultural and religious sites essential to their history and identity. So, with this one quote that I liked a lot, it says, "Land was the scene of the crime, but land was not the criminal." So, it is about declaring these things heritage sites so then they could declare them something they can take over, right? And not get anybody to agree with them. This has been the theme throughout this entire work that I've been sharing. No one is being asked about anything for their approval. It is just being cleverly forced on them. And in this case, it's like, we got to save the lions. Well, who's gonna argue with that, right? Until they see this dark underbelly. So this last article I will talk about, it is called Shaky Ground, How the United States Uses the Land to Steal Indigenous Land. So throughout the chaos, the application of U.S. law to indigenous people had an unflinching goal, theft. By marginalizing indigenous peoples and their rights under their treaties, and since 1924 as full citizens of the United States, federal anti-Indian law has served the rich and powerful. So the United States is a land office business, all about profiting off land. Or, as Washington warned, you snooze, you lose. The Supreme Court has long provided legal cover for those who wish to wrest land and resources from indigenous peoples. In the 1800s, the court declared in 3 opinions. So they say that the native people did not, in fact, own their land, but were mere occupants. If the Christians had discovered it, and that native nations were wards, wards of the United States, and that the United States had ultimate dominion over all native land and peoples. And I've talked about this endlessly on that Manifest Destiny. So there was a good book out called How the U.S. Government is Helping Corporations Plunder Native Land, and it is still going on today. They are still digging up under native land. The Osage Nation just had hundreds of those wind turbines. It took them years to get those things removed. Yeah, kind of something else. So I'm going to be getting to the horror story right now. I have a whole bunch of links that I certainly hope you will take a look at. I didn't just casually take a look into this subject. There's some symbolism here that I'd like to point out. This country has a history of putting children in cages at the border. What happened was under Obama, the same guy that started the bombing of Yemen, the same guy that signed us up for the UN, that guy. Get the black guy in charge, so everybody's looking the other way, right? So anyway, Obama was the one who first put children in cages. Then along came Trump. So then idiots on social media were saying, oh, look, Obama's people were bringing up pictures and saying, look, Trump is putting children in cages. Well, they were so stupid that they were showing pictures of children in cages from when Obama was in charge. So Obama put them in those cages. And what is the significance of those cages? Well, get ready to have your stomach turned. Those cages mean punished, symbolism for humans in real cages, kids in cages, imprisoned, malnourished, and ignored before starting the real punishment and abuse. I think in a lot of these cases, these kids are also likely transported in cages. And I am totally guessing on that one, but it makes sense, right? And why did I start circling back around all this stuff? Well, because I now believe that Pizzagate was likely a dual operation to hide this Panda business, okay? So Pizzagate gave us certain words. Pizzagate is a conspiracy theory that went viral during the 2016 U.S. presidential election cycle. So they falsely claimed, supposedly, they were going through Anthony Weiner's emails that had been dumped by WikiLeaks, okay? And WikiLeaks released a bunch of emails in 2016. And those WikiLeaks emails are on purpose, right? It's a plan. So what happened was that people claim that there were coded messages in these emails. Well, yes, there were, in fact, coded messages. But from what I'm going to be talking about in a minute here, this was a very mild version of child rape, okay? And I don't mean that loosely, okay? So this Pizzagate got whipped up by QAnon and a whole bunch of other people like that crazy, amazing Polly. They were all whipping this thing up that get Trump into office and he's going to round up all the pedophiles. That was the theme of Pizzagate, okay? But what did I learn from Pizzagate? Well, I learned that they use a lot of words, right? And to start off with, I found an article from 2023 that says, the Black Eye Illuminati Club of the Elite. Why all the black eyes? Mysteriously, a growing number of high-status figures have photos with a black eye. Most often, their black and blue marks are on their left side. But why? Is this a coincidence or is it part of an occult ritual? Sure, accidents happen, but there are too many for it just to be that. So, to join an occult club or get big in Hollywood, often the recruit must undergo ritualistic torture or engage in sodomy. There is a sadomasochistic game called The Rite of Saturn, whereby initiates are tortured and abused to make them obey. The black left eye is part of the cult of the high-level Illuminati initiation ritual. The bruised left eye is a mark given to those who have scaled their way to the elite pyramid's top. The bearers of black eyes represent the Egyptian Horus, the celestial falcon god. And that one eye symbolism is all over the place. It's on the back of the US $1. As a matter of fact, Joe Rogan, on the opening to his show, he in fact has a one eye symbol right there in the center of his forehead. All of these people are part of this deal, okay? They may appear friendly and nice and all that, but this is their deal. So, the bearers of black eyes represent the Egyptian Horus, Horus. So, in each Egyptian mythology, Horus loses his one eye in a battle with Set. That is an allegory of the sunset. When Seth plucks out the eye of Horus, it means that the sun has descended into Hades. Could the bruising of the left eye be a nod to this, perhaps? In esoteric circles, the black left eye is the eye of the night, the moon. In contrast, the white right eye is the eye of the day, the sun. As a rule, the right. And they have all of that black and white symbolism all around. That means just good and evil. Same thing with the eyes. So the left eye, okay, as a rule, the right eye represents good, while the left eye is seen as evil. There is another theory that the black eye is the third eye or hidden eye. The third eye chakra is associated with the pineal gland, which is about a pea's size. The band Black Eyed Peas sings a song called Third Eye, with lyrics, I got three eyes. One look from the left side, the other from the right side. Got one eye on the inside, and I can see you outside plotting to come in. The one-eyed sigil traces back to ancient Egypt. The Knights Templars, the original pirates who had the largest naval fleet in medieval times, would also adopt the one-eye symbolism. The pirates, of course, are known for wearing a patch over their one eye. They also flew a skull and bones flag, which reveal their allegiance to death. Thus, when celebs and other high-profile individuals appear in public with black eyes, their explanations of how they got their bruises may not be truthful. They are more likely involved in an occult ritual, which signals they are followers of the left-hand path. And I found this really, really interesting. What is the left-hand path? The left-hand path is considered to be about the elevation and centrality of the self, as well as the rejection of religious authority and societal taboos. The left-hand path focuses on the strength and will of the practitioner. It downplays the need for intersection by any higher power, although some may believe that a higher power exists. Satanism and Luciferianism are considered left-hand paths. What is the right-hand path? The right-hand path, in the words of left-hand path followers, concentrate on the symbols of goodness, of the sun, of herd mentality, and submission to God and religious authority. To put a little more diplomatic, the right-hand path can be thought of as one of dogma, ritual, and a belief in the community and formal structure, as well as a higher power. Though each of those can also be found in left-hand path religions, there is less focus on indulging the self in the right-hand path. The vast majority of religions are considered part of the right-hand path from Christianity to Wicca. So I definitely don't think you want to be on the left-hand path. Now, I do believe that they recruit people and tell them that they're going to get all these good things, but that is where the trick comes in, right? Because they lure them in with money. I think a tremendous amount of parents got convinced to flip their own children. Where do you think we get all these transgender newscasters in all these small towns and stuff? Because that was the plan, not the bug in the system. So I found this article called Who is Punching Them? It had a picture of Charlie Rose, Madonna, Pope Francis, Robert Downey Jr., George W. Bush, Ben Affleck, John McCain, Prince Philip, Harry Reid, John Kerry. Yeah, they're all in it, aren't they? And they call it also the Fight Club. First rule of the Fight Club, you do not talk about the Fight Club. So, according to some conspiracy theorists, the black left eye is part of a cult or Illuminati high-level initiation ritual during which the pledger is said to be forced to eat pain in a quest to become more powerful. The theory has gained popularity on platforms like TikTok and has been associated with various celebrities and figures who have been seen with black eyes. Some of the celebrities and prominent people who have sported black eyes over the past year or two include Jennifer Lopez, Vladimir Putin, Boy George, Barack Obama, John McCain, Richard Branson, Ben Affleck, Madonna, Adam Sandler, Harry Reid, George W. Bush, John Kerry, Kanye West, and many others. There was this woman named Sherry Schreiner. Sherry was an author and internet radio show. She wrote this book called Interview with the Devil, in which she claimed to converse with Lucifer and has spoken on the link between these black eyes and what they call soul scalping. Keep in mind, I have done all of these things. I have, you can contact evil beings that are floating around. Yes, this stuff can all happen. I've done the astral projection. I've done all of this stuff. I was thinking the other day, I don't know why I didn't keep doing it, but I didn't. So maybe because I had some agreement with myself that I wasn't going to. That's the only thing I can think of. But anyway, so let's get to this soul scraping. Excuse me, soul scalping. According to Schreiner, government leaders, people on TV with their own shows, and hundreds of popular entertainers have sold their souls to Satan. You cannot be on TV now without signing on the dotted line. The bizarre reoccurrence of facial bruises on politicians and entertainers have resulted in speculation that their souls have been replaced in a satanic ritual called soul scalping. Schreiner, who died earlier this year, believed all the powerful and people in the world have been soul scalped. She said this can be done in a number of ritualistic ways, all of which result in a possession, whereby the human soul is removed and the body taken over by the demonic entity. Well, in some conspiracy circles, this process is also called a walk-in, and some people believe the blackened eye is a result of soul scalping. Now, you can contact walk-ins, and I did this. It would have been like, I'm trying to think, somewhere in the 80s. There were a few of us, and we tried all of these things, okay? And I do not recommend trying a single one of them because ever since that time, if somebody told me they knew how to channel or they wanted to go look at somebody do channeling and calling up spirits, no, thank you. What happened was that we were calling up spirits using this Ouija board. Yeah, we got a hold of a few of them. And I won't make this a long story because I got to keep moving here. But yeah, one of the people, there was just a few of us, okay? And one of the people became overtaken by one of these spirits. So if you're ever wondering, am I really crazy? This should convince you. No, I'm just kidding because this seriously is what happened. This person became overtaken by one of these spirits. Yeah, it was something else. It was something else. And from that day forward, I never had anything to do with anything. So yeah, so they're getting all these things. Is it soul scalping? I don't really know. I've read that people that go into comas and stuff can be had walk-ins take over their bodies, and people say, "Oh, they seem so different after they came out of that coma." That could be part of it. I don't think in this case it's really soul scalping with them. I just don't think so. But anyway, and Prince, but they're doing it seems to be more than once because Prince Philip was seen with one in 2013 and one in 2015, and Prince Andrew had one in 2017. Um, so yeah, I don't think that, I'm 70. I've never had a bruised eye, and I've had some pretty bad accidents in my life. So, um, the bruised left eye has also been referred to as the Illuminati Shiner, a mark given to those who have scaled their way to the top of the elite pyramid. Some researchers suggest a link between the bearers of black eyes to the worship of the Egyptian sun god Horus, whose left eye was black and represented the moon, and whose right eye was white and represented the sun. So, in the past, it was believed that a black eye was the devil's mark, as noted in the 1879 Freeman's Journal called A Black Eye. So, I don't know. I one of the psychopaths that I interviewed for my book, he made a statement to me. He said, "Listen, if you're ever thinking that I don't want to be the way that I am or that I want to change, you have missed the entire point. I am proud of who I am." So yes, they are proud of who they are. That's why they're the chosen ones, right? So, and I believe a lot of people think they're going to get to be the chosen ones that go along with this stuff. A lot of people are going along with this stuff. So, what happens? These kids are first sodomized, beaten, and tortured, and that gives them, the kids get the black eyes. They're called the Panda eyes. And from the FBI's own page, here are some of the words that got me circling here in the first place. Panda eyes. It is slang for child sodomy. When a child is forcibly sodomized, its eyes can go to black circles and appear to be like that of a panda. So that's why they use it as their symbolism. They hang out with panda bears. They just think they're so clever and above it all, right? When really most of us would consider them just fucking demons, right? So here's some of these words. Hot dog means a boy. Pizza means a girl. Cheese is a little girl. Pasta is a little boy. And this is what I want you to pay attention to. Ice cream means male prostitute. Who runs around licking ice cream cones? Joe Biden. I've always thought that was weird because they go to these events in Iowa for their elections and stuff, and they're always there eating hot dogs, right? Well, hot dogs are kind of if you eat a hot dog or a banana in public, you could be signaling something, right? So they always eat these hot dogs. Well, now we know why, right? And as a public figure, walking around licking an ice cream cone has always struck me as odd. Well, Joe Biden licks ice cream cone. Is he a male prostitute? Well, you decide. The word walnut means a person of color, and map, M-A-P, means semen. So how do the kids get the black eyes? Well, this is completely something that I have. They talk about covering the face of the child with semen while giving them black eyes after torture, and they do fist and sodomizing. So they do fist sodomizing. And this is just what I have concluded with. I don't know if it's right or if it's wrong, okay? But what causes black eyes? Well, a head injury could cause a black eye. And I will say this, and this is all I need to say, is that I imagine that if you are anally abusing a tiny child, possibly they could get head injuries, right? So maybe, and this is just my conclusion after going through days and weeks of all of this horrific data, this is my conclusion that you get a head injury. Seems like it would be logical to happen, so that's all I have. So, I've joked in the past and said that I'm not running a cult, but maybe I wish I was running a cult. You know what I would do if I was running a cult right now? I would be up here screaming at the top of my lungs, we're going to go after the people that have the black eyes. We're going to torch them. That's what I would be saying if I was running a cult. So, and I could probably get myself in trouble with that because I have this weird thing going on in my house right now. And I will be talking next about my 3-year adventure getting smart meter radiation in my home, but every time I've had a strange thought, they've always worked out to be true, right? Because that's how I figured out this whole thing. Just looking out my window and thinking, why is that truck out there? And then I look and, well, that truck's out there installing things around my house. So I think they've been meeting to try to figure out how to bomb my house. Seriously, because I think they're getting frustrated that I'm not dead yet because I have come up with some pretty good maneuvers, which I will share with you in a show specifically about this. But for some weird reason, I keep having this reoccurring thought that they want to plan to bomb my home. Well, how do you bomb a home in Nebraska? I don't know. I'm not going to speculate. I'm just sharing with you that has been a reoccurring thought recently because it is rough in here. And technically, they should have gotten me a long time ago. So maybe they're getting a little bit of frustration because, as you know, psychopaths are all about control. And I have not made myself available to them to grab me. And it's not like I'm just wandering the streets. I'm living in a house. Okay, so enough of that. I'd like to close you with this one statement. There's going to be a lot coming up in the near future. I believe even more today that this is the final chapter of the game board. I do not believe that anybody, whoever is in charge of all of this, our creator or whoever that is, I don't believe that anybody has a stomach to see more children not only getting raped, but brutally raped of the worst kind. And it doesn't appear, they've given us all these stories as far as those priests at the Roman Catholic Church raping kids, all these things. Did membership for the church drop off? I don't think so. I think that we've been getting tested over and over again, and we are showing that we seem to be okay with these things because we are not doing anything about it, but keeping ourselves so busy on the circus called social media and Epstein, which I conclude is a false flag all the way around. It is a false flag to hide this Panda business. That's what it is about. And one word thing I will leave you with. You never know how strong you are until being strong is, in fact, your only choice. Goodbye for now and be safe out there.